If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we shall discuss the Road of Humanity, the most common of philosophical roads of enlightenment adopted by Cainites to stave off the beast, to better help you roleplay seemingly humane vampires. All vampires feign their humanity. It is a concept that cannot work for us, for we are no longer human. We are the bastard child of Cain, punished by God and the archangels to walk the lands forevermore, whose tainted blood has ruined countless lives. My eternal existence has been significantly improved because of my embrace, but that is neither here nor there, for most kindred do not share this mindset. All neonates and some ancilla try to convince themselves they are in touch with that humanity, that they have the beast under control. Now, perhaps they are right. Perhaps they do have their beast on a tight leash. They've put their own rules and restrictions on themselves and, by extension, it, the beast. This in of itself is all the evidence needed to prove that humanity does not work. You are a vampire. You fear succumbing to the beast, for that is the worst thing a vampire can do. And yet, if you do not let that beast out every so often and satiate its needs, the forces around you, both supernatural and mundane, will bring about your final death. You are damned either way. But for once, this is not an exercise in how quickly I can break your will by scaring you into submission. This is my attempt to sympathize with your plight and to demonstrate that upholding your humanity via humanitas is much harder than just sticking to your old ways, pretending that the evil within doesn't bother you. The road and path of humanity is essentially one of two root roads, for lack of a better term. With a bit of thought, you'll know the other is the road and path of the beast, which we will unravel on a separate night. I know you well enough to know that you already look down on those who submit to the will of the beast, as you have already inherited some of that elitism from the ivory tower. But that elitism is much older, as the high clans, the La Sombra, Zemitzi, Bruja, Toreador, and Vontru often adopted a superior stance, whereas the rest, the low clans, were, as a whole, muted to this. The notable exceptions to this were the Banu Hakim, or the Assamites, depending on who you ask. Most vampires who would follow the path of humanity would not be taught it for, well, obvious reasons. They continue to emulate their former mortal behaviors. You, neonate, would fall into this camp. Some, on the other hand, have been taught the road of humanity, either by another kindred or discovering it on their own, relying on foggy memories of a life gone past. Most recently, it is the La Sombra who would have been taught this, as the bulk of the clan have moved from the Sabbat to the Camarilla sometime during the 2010s. Similarly, many younger Sabbat members have defected to the Anarchs, most notably the Zemitzi. The Sabbat Cainites would have abandoned their humanity upon their embrace. Therefore, those who are taught the ethics of the road this way are not taught to be human, for that is forever beyond them. Instead, they're taught how to use human responses to situations as a means of exerting a sense of self-control, whilst maintaining one's faculties in the face of adversity. This is not teaching the kindred how to be a good member of mortal society, for that does not benefit anyone. It is more of a way of leaving no weaknesses for the beast to exploit in its quest to rob the vampire of practically everything. By treating those around you with common decency, not to harm, not to kill, not to steal, etc., one can tame the beast this way. But even those who are freshly embraced are not perfect pillars. The creme de la creme of the road are not allowed selfish thoughts, and no one, not even the Pope, is that perfect. But what defines a selfish thought exactly? Well, like our traditions, the ethics of the road are fluid, to best fit the prodigal's description. Oh, prodigal was the name given to Cainites who followed the road. As you expect, it is a title not really used anymore. What is worth remembering as a brief summarization is that those who are taught the path behave much differently to those like yourself who are natural followers. The problem that the natural followers of the path often bring is that they kick and scream about everything inhumane around them, failing to understand the greater gravitas of the world they are in. And yet, you would find that many followers in the Dark Ages would be very tight-lipped about following this road. Regardless of your introduction, whether it was rigorous beating from your sire or it was something you have forced upon yourself, following the road is far more than denying the beast a foothold in your soul. It is also far more than pretending to be human also. I am not that dense to your plight, child. Despite it all, I know that it takes a certain level of iron will to do what you do. It doesn't make you a morally good vampire. All the evil in the world, after all, is derived from mortals. Things were far more formal once. A neonate would be introduced into the road for one thing, where groups of kindred studied the Book of Nod, not from a Nodist's point of view, but from the perspective of Cain's vengeful damnation, using it as a guide for us to seek salvation, us as in the universal we, kindred. Not you and I. Anyway, it was not uncommon for Cainites inducted in this fashion to recite the Pact of Athens, which was conjured by ancient Roman Salubri, Bruja, Venture, and Toreador, that acted as the road's traditions, that acts as a definitive guide to how one should follow the road. I shan't go through it with you, mainly because it is common sense from a mortal's point of view and how it and the traditions surrounding the road died out with the formation of the sects. Following the road of humanity does have some issues in the bestowing of the blood. One could argue that the embrace of the child and moulding their perspective on their naturally occurring humanity is the closest a vampire can have to a child, an actual child, raising the baby they could not have birthed otherwise. Of course, to strip someone of their humanity by the embrace is seen by many as a sin. You would also be right to assume that the creation of ghouls was, and still is, a hot topic amongst humane vampires. Now, what isn't discussed as frequently anymore is the use of disciplines. As I said earlier on, neglect the gifts of the blood and you will eventually succumb to final death by the hands of another. There is no shame practicing your disciplines and using them to your advantage, but becoming too indulgent on them not only risks you breaking the masquerade, but further detaches yourself from humanity. When using any discipline, literally any of them, you have to weigh the possible consequences. What good will it bring, and who and what am I serving by doing things this way? Auspex, Obfuscate, and Presence are free disciplines that passively aid you in night-to-night activities, as they subtly add to one's ability to sense, blend in, and be respectful. The likes of Potence, Fortitude, and Celerity, on the other hand, supernaturally detach yourself from mortality in strength, physical endurance, and speed respectively. Yes, I know they are free of the most common disciplines, which makes them the three most common disciplines that detach yourself from the kind. It may not mean much to you, a fairly fresh neonate who may just appear that bit stronger than most people, but think of myself. Now, not to toot my hoot, but I am fairly well versed with Potence. With it, I could very easily crush your head like a paper bag and bury you in the foundations of this building with a sneeze. Colin has taken ballista bolts and barely flinched. Yes, I know Colin is probably the worst example to use when talking about the road of humanity, but there is a reason why I bring him up. It will come to no surprise to you that there are more unusual disciplines, for lack of a better word, that categorically alter your perception of your humanity. Chemistry, dementation, obtenebration, and vicissitude are some of said disciplines, the last two in particular being both inhuman and inhumane. The likes of necromancy and quietus force the user to study the dead and undead via the contemplation of their existence, causing degeneration that way. Having a herd, a group of willing mortals to feed on, is undeniably imperative to your survival and to the survival of any kindred holding on to their humanity. It can make the difference between your sanity and the satisfaction of the beast. It is not a cure by any means, but it is most certainly a consolation for such emotions. And if choosing a group of kind to feed upon, be it friends, contacts, or, heaven forbid, your mortal family, is too much, you are limited to feed from animals, but that doesn't seem to bother you too much. But should you have a change of heart, do not feed on my pets. They are mine. Anyway, everyone has their own morals and interpretation what it means to be. In the case of you, it means finding your definition of what being human means to you. During our Dark Ages, this meant following one of the diverging paths that extended from the road of humanity that has since faded from common knowledge. Fortunately for you, I have the knowledge and I am certainly not common. The path of breath, or path of life, or path of soul encourages its adherents to via anima, meaning they are to live and breathe as the mortals do. I speak metaphorically here. To be human is to act as such. It is said that the soul defines man from beast. The soul grants intellect, reason, and higher emotions. You should think, breathe, and do what they do, and rise above the vile intentions of the beast. You make the lives of mortals around you better. You save a life to prove that you're not a monster. Even thinking or acting like a vampire is considered a great sin to some on this path. Sin is unforgivable, but letting it go unnoticed is a sin of itself. It is a righteous path, but it is not meant as a conflict against these seemingly lesser paths, but to become a greater balance in the world. They have the potential to be better than the mortals, vampires I mean, so why can't they? It is ultimately a balancing act with the inspired, making sure selfless doesn't become self-righteous. The Via Communitas, the path of community, is said to have Islamic origins and have a broader view on humanity. Isolation brings madness which, for the case of the beast, turns us into monsters. The civilized believe that being part of the community of mortals is where one can retain your humanity. There is a lot in that, but as with all things, there is more nuance than that. By cultivating a herd of friends or lovers, if you are the more risque sort of individual, you raise it up. The betterment of the herd becomes the betterment of the Cainite, as it becomes the responsibility of the Cainite to protect the herd, using the gifts of the blood with great trust on the herd's part, especially if the Cainite's coterie is involved. To that end, theft is forbidden. The civilized were often admitted by princes for being genuinely good peacekeepers between kindred and kine, or Cainite and kine if we're going to be pedantic for a moment. Anyway, the previous two paths, the path of breath and the path of community, focus on the mortal community around them. The path of illumination was seen as heretics within the road of humanity because of their inward spiritual ideals. It was a path that was taught, not found. Not one group of mortals or societies bear fruit to answer, so the illuminated travelled, abandoning Western religious traditions. This is why they were seen as apostates, so much so, it was not uncommon for staunch warriors of the Road of Heaven and Kings to hunt down the illuminated, for they were falsely accused of being believers of Cainite hearsay. Now this may sound a little familiar to you. Yes, the illuminated walk alone, just as Cain did when he was punished, to try and find their own redemption for the sin that is their existence. Yes, what they strive for is some definition of Golconda. The illuminated are very similar to that of the rovers, who follow the path of vigor, in that they wander around. Their reasoning, however, is different. The path of vigor is a path of change and motion, embracing trends, movements, innovations, and revolutions to better understand the struggles and feelings of the mortals. Such interactions were often appreciated, if not always wise, and on occasion most foolish. At the same time, the opposites of their beliefs, stillness and stasis, are twin pillars in which stable Cainite society is based, so there was some contention between them and the rest of their fellow vampires. So you can see, child, that there is much more to your existence than being you, but with fangs and superpowers. Even if you ignore the dead paths of the road we rarely consider a road, following the road and paths of humanity is one of balance. It is acknowledging what you truly are, whilst doing everything you can to fuck over the beast. Sure, you could argue that all roads and paths deal with this issue as well, but this is the last time during our discussion on the roads and paths where your humanity will even be discussed as a main contributing factor. I do not have much respect for today's youth. Their lack of seriousness regarding the situation we're in and their obstinate attachment to technology irritates me greatly. Yes, that does include you. However, I am not old and stubborn enough to acknowledge it takes a lot of mental and spiritual willpower to cling onto something so dearly, protecting it as if it were made out of glass that would shatter otherwise in the wrong hands. But it is only because you and your ilk do not know any better. Soon, your humanity will shatter, and you will need someone or something to help you pick up the pieces. You'll see, child. You'll see. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.